Madam President, I listened to the statements made this morning by the Republican and Democratic Senate leaders about the job ahead. I think it goes without saying that we are still in the midst of a health crisis and an economic crisis in this country. We did respond. We responded on March 26th in the Senate with the CARES Act. It was a bipartisan measure, a measure that engaged the leaders of the House and the Senate, Democrats, Republicans, Mr. Mnuchin, and the White House. In 8 days, we crafted a measure which may be one of the costliest ever costliest measures ever passed by the Senate, some $3 trillion. It was an enormous investment in America, but it was desperately needed. It was, of course, crafted in a way to provide help for research and medical care, but also to invest in the people of America. We understood then, and I hope we still do, that small businesses struggling to reopen, struggling to survive, need a helping hand, and we provided with the Paycheck Protection Program. Hundreds of billions of dollars loaned to these businesses, which could be forgiven if in fact they invested them in their employees and in coming back to life after the end of this crisis. An equally important, if not more important, investment was on unemployment benefits. There are now some 47 million unemployed Americans, one of the highest numbers in modern history. And we know that unemployment brings with it hardship, sacrifice, and challenge. And that's why we included in the original bill, the CARES Act, a federal supplement to unemployment benefits of $600 a week. Some came to the floor and argued it was too much money. We would be giving people so much money that they'd never want to return to work. I disagreed with that conclusion. I believe most people in America are proud and determined to get back on their feet and don't want to find themselves dependent on others. They want to be independent. And I believe that ultimately they will be. But for the time being, we need to stand with these families to make sure they can pay their mortgages and keep their homes and not lose their lifetime investment, to make certain that they can pay the basics in life, food and utility bills, the needs for clothing and education for their children. But on July 31st, in just a few days, that unemployment program will expire. Speaker Nancy Pelosi passed a bill about 4 weeks ago called the HEROES Act, a $3 trillion bill, and has languished here in the United States Senate. Senator McConnell, when asked if he would call this bill, said that he didn't feel there was any urgent need to do so. I hope that Senator McConnell now feels a sense of urgency. He came to the floor this morning and characterized the House effort of a month ago, the HEROES Act, as unserious, a political wish list, that people were laughing at how unrealistic it was. Well, many people may have laughed at our original effort at $3 trillion, but it was desperately needed, as is a second effort, as soon as possible. Senator McConnell said this morning that his priorities when we return in 2 weeks will be to focus on kids, jobs, and health care. Well, I couldn't agree with him more. And many of the aspects of the HEROES bill that passed the House of Representatives address those very subjects. If you want to take care of the kids of America, take care of their parents who are unemployed, make certain that they have unemployment assistance, make certain that there are COBRA benefits paid for by the government so they can maintain their health insurance at this time of health crisis. If you want to make sure that kids of America have a fighting chance and that we create jobs, provide money to state and local governments. I'm reminded this morning of how many people that we call healthcare heroes are actually employees of state and local governments who are risking their lives to fight this pandemic every single day. When the bill that passed the House of Representatives dedicated money for that purpose, it was money to invest in kids, in jobs, and in health care, the 3 priorities announced by Senator McConnell. His notion that we owe nothing to these state and local units of government is to ignore the obvious. Their alternative will be to lay off teachers, nurses, healthcare professionals, people that are desperately needed for us to resume the normal activities of this American economy. And I also hope that Senator McConnell will be open to the suggestion that we provide additional funds for our hospitals across America. I know what's going on in Illinois, and I've read what's going on in his state of Kentucky. Hospitals, the major employers in many small communities, are laying off dozens, if not hundreds, of employees because of the state of the economy and because of the healthcare challenge. Hospitals in downstate Illinois have ads on the radio and TV constantly saying it's safe to go back to your hospital for elective surgery and outpatient care. And because people are still reluctant to do so in my part of the world, they're withholding the funds that could be paid to those hospitals for the care that people needed. We've got to see that change. We've got to restore confidence, not only in our economy, but first in the state of health care in America. We need to move on this. Senator McConnell has said the House of Representatives doesn't meet as frequently as the United States Senate, and that may be true over the last several months. But let me remind him we're in a period of time when we're all discouraged from travel that is unnecessary, and we're all told to be careful where we're going, when we're going, and not to gather in groups that might be a danger with the pandemic that we face. The House of Representatives has produced dramatically more legislation than the United States Senate over the last year and a few months in so many different areas, which we will highlight during the remainder of this week. The House of Representatives has sent legislation to the Republican leader, Senator McConnell, which he ignores. For him to come to the floor and then criticize the House for not being in session enough. What's the point, Senator McConnell? They passed legislation that you put in the legislative graveyard of the United States Senate. You won't even take it up to debate it. We're on this inexorable path to fill every judicial vacancy with people who are thinly qualified, if qualified at all, for lifetime appointments, so long as they meet the Republican political ideology test. That's what we spend our days and weeks doing here in the United States Senate, instead of addressing issues of substance like this pandemic and the economic crisis which our nation faces. I want to address the issue of liability too, because Senator McConnell brought it up again this morning. He's basically said that he wants to protect those who are engaged in dealing with the public from liability for their actions. He said that if they live up to what he called the best available guidelines, they should be spared any liability for their actions. Well, let me just tell you, I don't know what the best available guidelines might be, but the best available guidelines should be a pronouncement by our healthcare experts as to what makes for a safe workplace and what makes for a safe retail establishment. And if the owner is living up to those standards, yes, I agree with him. That should be a valid defense for anyone who suggests wrongdoing. But at this moment, the Republicans cannot have it both ways. They cannot argue that we should give immunity to businesses if they live up to some guidelines and not tell us where those guidelines originate and whether they're based on science and public health standards. If they are, they can be taken seriously. If they're not, then this is an empty promise, a promise at the expense of customers and employees who still show up for work. We have a lot of work to do. We'll finish up this week and be gone for 2 weeks. And then in the 3 weeks or 4 weeks that we return before the August recess, we have a responsibility to not only deal with the economic crisis facing America, but to take this healthcare crisis seriously. Dr. Fauci said the other day, we're not in a second peak in terms of infection. He believes we're still reaching the first peak, which means there are many challenges ahead. It is time for us all to get serious. It's time for the president to slap on a mask and to stop with this colossal ego of his, which won't let him be seen with a mask. If he did this today and put on a mask, it would be a message to his loyalists that defying this basic protection of the people around you is simply not smart and arrogant in its approach. We need to have some humility here. This virus is on the attack and doesn't care what political party you belong to. And so I encourage the president, put on a mask once and for all. Don't be the last American to ignore the obvious. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.